Today, we're going to find out whether or not we can beat Megaman Battle Network with only the Mega Buster. The first thing we should get out of the way is exactly what we're playing. This is probably not the Megaman Battle Network you played on your own Game Boy Advance, but rather a DS remake that was released in 2009 only in Japan. The game is functionally identical to the original, with a few quality of life improvements from later games and a crossover storyline with Mega Man Star Force, the spiritual successor to the Megaman Battle Network series. This is a fan translation, and if you want to learn more, I'll leave a link in the description below. For those of you who have no idea what Mega Man or Battle Network are, here's a quick intro. The original classic series was first released in 1987 and took place in a world where physical, humanoid robots ran everything from power plants to waste management facilities to construction sites. However, the evil Dr. Wily would always take over these robots or create robots of his own, and Mega Man would have to step in and save the day. By the late 90s, this formula was getting stale. Capcom was competing with handhelds and card games like Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh!, so they released the Battle Network series in 2001 as a completely standalone Game Boy Advance spin-off. Instead of robots, the Battle Network series imagined a world where the internet was the key technological advancement. Our protagonists, Lan and his Navi program Megaman, jump on the internet to fight other Navis and viruses using his Mega Buster and battle chips. During this challenge run, we have one simple rule. We cannot attack enemies with a battle chip that is explicitly meant to damage them. With that, we're ready to get started. We start the game with Lan running late for school and Mail, his friend and love interest, waiting outside his house. Before we know it, we're in school and off to lesson 1, virus busting. This is a basic intro tutorial explaining the fundamentals of chips and battle. We're on a 3x6 grid split halfway with our enemies, and everyone has a certain number of clearly visible hit points. The first battle is with two Metors, a callback to the classic Mega Man series, and they each start with 40 HP. We, very conveniently, start with cannons that hit for 40 damage each. In a normal playthrough, this should result in immediate one-shots. You use one cannon on each Metor and you're done with the battle in seconds. However, we can't use the cannons. Our Buster does 1 damage, meaning that we need to move in between their pickaxe attacks and patiently hit them with 1 damage at a time until they're done. After this, we have 2 more tutorial battles, each of which have 3 enemies. Just like the first tutorial, the game is trying to teach us a new mechanic with each one. We're forced to pick the chips that they want us to, but once the battle begins, we don't actually have to use them. So we do what we did in the first fight and just chip away 1 damage at a time until they go down. Once we're done with the tutorial, we have the option to stay in our classroom and fight our classmate and best friend Dex and his Navi Gutsman. We're a little sloppy, but overall, Gutsman is a fun opponent given that he can crack our stage and limit our movements. We want to avoid the column closest to him as much as possible because he can rush up and punch us, and if the ground cracks behind us, we're vulnerable to almost all of his attacks. As expected for an early boss, the developers gave us some support. When Gutsman breaks the ground, most of his attacks can't reach us if we're in the back 2 columns. We chip away and end up winning the fight, but we don't get much for it since this was an optional one. Our first task is to log on and find some lost program for our classmate Yai. The internet has random encounters, just like the wild grass in Pokemon, except you can run into viruses anywhere on the net. One of the major quality of life changes from the original Game Boy release is the ability to run away from battles, which was added in later games in this series but didn't exist in the original. This would have been an absolute nightmare if we couldn't run away from enemies. As we scour the internet for Yai's program, one major thing to note is that we can access a shop. They sell a power-up for 2,000 zennies, which we can use to increase one attribute of our Buster. Either its power, speed, or charge. But first, we need to get those 2,000 zennies, and that in itself is a grind. We can get some cash from these blue or green mystery diamonds, but most of the time, we're getting useless chips like shotgun or guard. We can also go through the time-consuming process of fighting enemies, but there's no guarantee that we'll be rewarded with cash, even if we perform poorly. These mystery diamonds respawn every time we enter the room, so I keep going in and out until we finally have enough to upgrade our Buster attack power. This increases the pellet's damage from 1 to 2, and that makes an enormous difference. One thing I do want to note is folder management. Our folder is full of a bunch of chips that we can't use, but it does have some useful ones, including escape, which allows us to flee most battles, and recovery chips that can heal us. As we move forward, we'll be replacing as many of these irrelevant chips as possible with useful, non-attacking chips. Now it's time to find out what's going on downstairs. Before we walked upstairs, there was a suspicious looking repair guy fixing our oven, and now all of a sudden it's on fire. Megaman Jackson, and we're off to fight our first villain. This is a pretty easy area since it's very small and there aren't a ton of puzzles. That makes sense for the first boss of the game. As you can see, I'm literally doing twice as much damage to the normal enemies, which is a major relief. The early battles are no longer a slog, but I start to get a bit overconfident. The puzzle, if you can call it that, is just putting out fires with a few extra extinguishers to spare. As soon as we start the FireMan battle, I run up to him and start tanking his attacks, which is a really dumb idea. We're on low HP and I have to be careful for the remainder of the battle. However, he's got very few attacks and most of them are pretty telegraphed. The only dangerous move he has is the diagonally moving flames, and that's just due to pure sloppiness on my part. We get lucky and he doesn't use it very often. The best move for us is his bomb throw, since he stands in place for quite a bit and is an easy target. After a couple of rounds, we get through and get ourselves a sweet 1000 zennies. Especially in the early game, money is extremely important while we're grinding for these power-ups. It is really tiring to do it against low-level enemies. Lan goes to sleep and the story pushes us straight to the school and into our second boss villain plot. It's just a normal day at school when all of a sudden, someone named Mr. Higsby takes over the school, locks it down, and takes the students and teachers as hostages. Of course, we have to save the day, so we jack into the blackboard and go through a little bit of a maze with a number of gates. Each gate is locked with either a question like how many tables are in the classroom, or how many doors are in the school, or a completely random trial and error puzzle. Still, it's pretty early in the game, so the area isn't very long and the puzzles aren't too hard, but it's a clear step up in difficulty from the FireMan area. Once we get to NumberMan is where the trouble begins. This really could have been a run stopper. NumberMan typically stands in place, but throws out balls with numbers on them, which do massive damage if they hit you. The number on each of the balls goes down as we damage that ball until it gets completely destroyed. So for example, if a ball that NumberMan throws out has 10 on it, we need to do 10 damage to destroy it before it hits us. If we're doing 1 damage at a time, there is almost no way we'd be able to survive most of these. Because the school is locked down, we can't go back to the merchant and pick up the power-up at this point if we didn't grind to get it the first time. Once we're able to get by most of his numbered balls and move on to the second phase, NumberMan starts placing exploding dice and time bombs on our side of the field. Similarly, these need to be damaged and destroyed as soon as possible, otherwise they do major damage. However, our 2 damage Mega Buster gets the job done, and we're off on our next adventure. Instead, we're off to go see our dad at work, but we can't access the trains. There's some sort of disturbance on the internet that's preventing the trains from working. Lan and Megaman go online, and we use this as an opportunity to buy the second power-up, which I put into charge. This allows me to charge my Mega Buster. The quick, short charge attack multiplies our attack power by 8, so it does 16 damage, while the second, much longer to charge attack multiplies our attack by 16, so it does 32 damage. I also decide to do a quick rematch with Gutsman, and the charge attack makes a world of difference. We deal with him pretty quickly and get access to Dex's internet access point. We then go into Internet Area 2, and through another maze full of random encounters, finally come across Stone Man. I use the opportunity to swap out some attacking chips with random non-attacking chips in my folder, as well as buy some HP memory to increase my HP, and boom, we're ready to go. This is an extremely simple boss battle, as we can just charge, avoid some rocks, and knock out his giant HP pretty quickly. He doesn't move at all, which helps us make quick work of him. Now, it's time to go visit our dad at Scilab, a government agency, but he's not there. When we get home, he sends us another HP memory and another power-up. I'm not sure whether or not to use the power-up for damage or speed, but we'll go with speed for now, which helps us fire our standard buster slightly faster. The next day, we go to school and find out that there's no water. There's an issue at the government waterworks, which is directly connected to Scilab, where Lan's dad works. We have to go through a bunch of story back and forth across different rooms in different areas, talking to people to figure out exactly how to get the water running again. This is also our first run-in with Chod, Proto-Man's operator. We decide to hide overnight and then jack in to solve the problem. The waterworks is a relatively straightforward ice puzzle, almost like the ice caves in Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal. One of the paths is blocked by a colorful Navi on a bouncy ball, who we later find out is named ColorMan. Very, very creative. It's pretty obvious that it's a future bad guy. We're completely blocked on that route, so we make a ton of progress on the rest of the waterworks, and all of a sudden, randomly run into what looks like a scripted fight against two ice bears. This fight completely caught me off guard. I was not expecting them to have such fast-moving attacks that also did 60 damage when our HP is so low. This hands us our first loss of the run. The big issue though, is that unlike Pokemon, which sends you back to your most recent Pokemon Center, Battle Network sends you back to the intro screen, meaning that I have to figure out where I last saved and move forward from there. We have to completely do the entire Waterworks story again. This is your classic cautionary tale of saving your game as often as you can, folks. As we repeat the entire plotline, we're able to make it through Waterworks, and through some very basic pattern recognition, defeat the two polar bears, only to find out that they were the ones causing the water shortage. However, now there's poisonous water everywhere. I also make sure to go to Higsby's newly opened shop to get some recovery chips. Once again, the more that I can replace attacking chips with non-attacking ones, the more useful our folder becomes. Now there's poisonous water everywhere because WWW has kidnapped the son of one of the employees at Waterworks. We find the son and then log back into the Waterworks intranet to go along that route that was previously blocked off. There's nothing noteworthy about this route except for one area with a really annoying ice puzzle. There are holes to fall through, and there are multiple branching paths. There is a power-up hidden in one of the holes in this floor, which I use to increase our power. We're doing 3 damage now with each buster shot. We're trying to tell the employee that his son has been found, but he won't listen. And once Proto-Man realizes that it's a decoy, he goes off to fight off someone else, and we beat down this grieving father. IceMan is more annoying than difficult. He places ice blocks in front of him, so you can't shoot him directly with the buster. He throws ice bombs overhead that damage the adjacent squares. It took a little bit of time to follow his attack pattern. The battle ends up being pretty sloppy and drawn out, but the strategy we end up using is to just charge up, destroy 1 or 2 of the ice blocks as soon as they spawn, and keep attacking IceMan with charge shots. It's a war of attrition, but he goes down and we get ourselves some money. Once we've beaten IceMan, there's a little bit more story, everyone's safe and sound, all the misunderstandings are cleared up, and the water is back to normal. A few days later, Lan makes plans with Mail to go see Dentown, a nearby city, but she takes the bus and ends up running late. We scope out the area and meet the operator for ColorMan in an antique shop. Similar to the first fight with Gutsman, this is entirely optional and has no impact on our progression. I give the battle a try, but we're a little too weak right now, so we'll save this for later. We head out and find out that Mail's bus has been hijacked, and it's up to us to jack into these high-tech automated traffic lights and turn them red so that the bus will slow down and ultimately stop. This area has a pretty cool puzzle with alternating roads. We can basically reverse polarity and go down either a blue path or a red path and switch between them as we move forward. It's nothing too complicated, but just mentally engaging enough to be interesting without being annoying. It's a big improvement from the ice section. Most of the enemies here are pretty straightforward, but I do want to note the Aqua and Fire Towers. They basically have the same attack, which is their element moving across the field and can move either straight or diagonally towards Megaman. It's not that hard to avoid, but it's easy to forget about. Moving forward, We jump from traffic light to traffic light and are able to breeze through until we run into ColorMan, who's harassing Roll. ColorMan is tougher than you'd expect because he has two guards with the exact attacks of the Aqua and Fire towers. They're invincible to the Buster, and ColorMan slithers along in the back being protected by them. There are very tight windows that ColorMan's available, so we've got to be quick. ColorMan sends out the giant ball that he's sitting on, and it bounces around our side of the field, further reducing the number of squares that we can use to avoid his Aqua and Fire attacks. At this stage, our Buster still takes quite a bit of time to charge, so we regularly run into the situation where we have an opening but aren't fully charged, or we're fully charged and can't find an opening. We end up being opportunistic, and rather than waiting for our Buster to fully charge, we'll end up using medium charge shots. ColorMan can only take so many medium charge shots before he goes down. The story moves on, and it seems like Lan is always just in the right place at the right time to stop these bad guys. Lan and his mom get invited to dinner at his dad's workplace, Scilab, and halfway through, the lights get sabotaged and all of a sudden everyone's without power. Super coincidentally, the power plant is in the exact same building, and we end up going down a trash chute to figure out what's going on. We jack in and reach one of the most annoying stages of the game. Here, we have invisible puzzles, a time limit, a trial and error battery puzzle, and programs that could either be enemies or give you the batteries you need to solve the puzzle and move forward. These enemies are extremely dangerous because they use ring zap, literally a powerful ring that zaps around them. They slowly advance towards you and use area grab to limit your space until it's too late. The first few can be barely dealt with. A couple of charge shots and you're done. However, as you progress, these get harder. They start showing up as random encounters, which can be run away from, but with higher HP, faster movements, higher damage, and multiple enemies, they become impossible to kill with our current Buster stats. By the time we reach the last area, I had to save, and every couple steps either try running away or dying in order to move past these enemies. They're not mandatory, so eventually we get to ElecMan. During this fight, we do some damage, but he ends up healing himself indefinitely. After a few rounds of attacking and healing, we realize it's a story set, and Lan has to turn off the generator. Now, we can really fight him. He has very few attacks, but the ones that he does have are extremely high in terms of damage output. He places shock towers on our side of the stage, but these can be easily taken down with a Mega Buster. And ElecMan himself is pretty vulnerable most of the time. As he gets close to dying, he can heal himself about 100 HP at a time, but it's not enough and we're able to take him down. This is where things get really interesting though. We have a back-to-back fight with ProtoMan without the option to save in between. ProtoMan has a shield that blocks attacks normally. He's only vulnerable immediately after attacking. The first fight, I did not have his pattern down and died almost immediately. However, round 2, the pattern is pretty straightforward. You just sidestep his sword, jump back as soon as possible, and hit him with the Charge Buster that resets the pattern. We save the day and enjoy the rest of the dinner party before heading home. For those of you who remember the original game in anime, this is where the story departs quite a bit. We wake up and find out that Roll has gotten kidnapped, so we go outside, talk to our friendly neighborhood WWW members outside of Mail's house, and find out that some blue Navi has kidnapped her. We head into Internet 2, and this is where we find the playable character from Megaman Star Force. We ask where Roll is, we assume that they're the ones that have taken Roll, and so the battle begins. I have to say, they did a really good job porting the character's moves and gameplay into this game. The most challenging part of the battle is that Megaman Star Force has the same Buster that we do. It shoots pretty quickly and it takes us out of our own charging animation. We don't want to stay the same row as him for too long, otherwise we'll get hit by the Buster or his long-range movement. However, the strategy isn't too difficult, and after some time we get the job done. Megaman heads into the portal and finds Roll frozen at the end of the area. He starts heading towards her, and then gets frozen himself. We then figure out that this whole thing is a misunderstanding and that Geostellar, or Megaman Starforce, is actually an ally trying to save his friend. We're now at this game's most interesting change from the original, the ability to play as Geostellar or Megaman Starforce. The key differences include auto charge on the Buster, a stand-in-place rapid-fire shot, being able to use the shield on command, and being able to zoom forward onto your enemy territory and use some chips at closer range, like the sword. Many of these are not going to be relevant to us since we can't use attacking chips, but the auto charge is really convenient. While it's much faster, the damage doesn't scale anywhere near the Battle Network Mega, as his charged Buster does 18 damage versus Megaman's 48. For now, we don't have any choice but to play as him, so we run some errands to save Megaman. Once we've completed the fetch quest, we can freely switch between the two. However, I'm likely going to be sticking to the main Megaman most of the time given the pure damage output. We continue running fetch quests to find actual clocks in the real world, including the one at the antique shop in Deadtown. I was originally planning on switching between the two Megamans depending on the battle, but I gave ColorMan a shot since we were already there, and it was much more difficult than you'd like with the limited damage output that Megaman Starforce can put out. ColorMan's arms swing around our side of the stage and are the most annoying hazard, since you have to weave around them and avoid ColorMan's standard same row fire attack at the same time. Starforce just couldn't do enough damage to knock out the arms or attack ColorMan himself fast enough. Once we switched to the original Megaman, we were able to use our mid-charge shot to beat him, which does 24 damage versus Starforce's fully charged shot, which does 18. Once we've done all of our fetch quests and make our way to ClockMan, we find out that he just wants to preserve and freeze all beautiful programs out there across all of time. This is really creepy, and definitely not the best story in the world, but let's be real, it's just an excuse for a crossover. ClockMan is actually a relatively difficult fight, as he throws clock hands which can't be destroyed by buster shots, and the clock in the back rings every so often to indicate that a special attack is about to be used. Each attack is pretty widely telegraphed and can be easily avoided on its own, but it's tougher to do that in conjunction with having to avoid the clock hands. I tried this battle first with Megaman Starforce given that it's his storyline, but just like ColorMan, the damage output was just too low to justify. I switched over to Battle Network Mega, and the higher damage made an enormous difference. We spend a lot of time waiting out his clock hands and building charge while he uses special attacks. He's actually quite vulnerable before and after his special moves, and sometimes even during. There's one move in particular which hits the front two rows, and ClockMan is just standing there. You can continually rapid fire the Buster to kill him. We finish the side story, and once everyone's safe and sound, we're ready to go back to the main game. Geostellar went back to his own time, but we retained the ability to use Megaman Starforce as a playable character whenever we'd like. Throughout the story so far, Lan and Megaman have been pretty reactive. However, for the first time, we're being proactive and going after WWW. Our path takes us to Scilab, where we speak to our dad and also get a pin from Dr. Freud, the employee who uses IceMan. This allows us to unlock certain parts of the internet that have potentially useful items. I also use this as an opportunity to fight Sharkman, one of the most notoriously difficult boss fights from the original game, given the extremely fast moves. For those of you who remember the anime, Masa the Fish Salesman was one of my absolute favorite characters. Sharkman's design is great, and actually doesn't correspond with any of the original Robot Masters from the classic series. Masa himself was a bumbling salesman who doesn't do very well in terms of business, but is a secret vigilante who fights WWW alongside Woodman and Skullman's operators. It was just a really funny bit. Going back to the game, we cannot beat Sharkman at this stage, which is fine because he's completely optional and we'll get to him later. To progress the story, we have to find out how to go deep into the Undernet, which only high-level WWW members have access to. On our way to the first Undernet section, we use our new pin to get a new power-up, which we use to boost our charge capabilities. The charge shot is really the thing that has kept us in the game with most bosses, so being able to charge faster sounds like a great idea. The first Undernet section is guarded by a virus that has a shield. In a normal playthrough, you can just attack it with a sword, or a bomb, or any number of other chips. However, we have to be really careful that we don't get hit by seemingly random bomb attacks. Doing that while avoiding these cannons, which have limited vulnerability, is extremely frustrating. We tank a bunch of hits from the cannonball, and that gives us the breathing room to learn the pattern of the main enemy here. We avoid the attacks and rapid fire our buster shot until the enemy lets go of its shield for just a little bit, and we continue to chip away until we've moved past. Once we're in, we find out that each subsequent area is also similarly guarded. We have to go on a little bit of a wild goose chase to find former members of WWW and get their undernet credentials. This seems pretty odd to me because if you're a criminal organization and you have people who leave, you don't really let them live, let alone retain their credentials. Even the most normal companies take back company property once you leave, let alone access to the freaking undernet. We scour the world and follow clues to find different members. During our travels, I decide to fight Woodman, who's pretty easy given our Buster's raw damage output and his very slow attacks. The former WWW members include Miss Yuri, our homeroom teacher's twin sister. She'll only give us her pass in exchange for seeing 60 chips in our folder, which would be super normal for someone at this stage in the game. However, we're only at 41, given that we haven't been killing things quickly enough to win their battle chips. This is definitely an unexpected consequence of our Buster-only battle style. This means that we'll have to scour the undernet to find new enemies to defeat and rack up money to buy chips for Mr. Higsby. This is incredibly annoying as the undernet is full of pretty strong enemies. I cannot understate how annoying and time-consuming this grind is, but it really is a key difference from a casual playthrough that we're so low in terms of our chip library. We actually end up doing pretty well and find a number of new chips and enemies, and start seeing some enormous Zenny drops, including this 10,000 Zenny mystery diamond. Now we can use all of this new money to buy battle chips and end this errand faster, but there are actually a few merchants in the undernet who sell power-ups, and if we can increase our buster damage, then we can finish battles faster and get new chips through better times. While we're scouring the undernet, we also run into some old friends, namely StoneMan, ColorMan, and ElecMan. These rematches exist in specific parts of the web so that we can earn their battle chips by doing well. This is extremely useful because no matter how low our score, we will always get their battle chip, which helps us with the library. None of them are too difficult, especially once we upgrade our buster damage from 3 to 5. This is a game changer, as our charged buster does 80 damage now, enough to 2-hit KO most random enemies up to this point. We finally get to 60 chips, go prove ourselves to Miss Yuri, and move deeper into the undernet. At the end of the path, we find BombMan. His attack is pretty straightforward, but it's very difficult to hit him with charge shots since he's usually hiding behind bombs. After a few deaths trying to pick up his attack pattern, we try again. I think I can avoid his bombs, but the reality is that with 3 bombs there's significant room for error. If we don't get rid of them, we run the risk of getting hit with big damage. I realized halfway through that he's probably better addressed with rapid fire, like NumberMan. We end up rapid firing pellets at the bombs and doing whatever leftover damage we can to BombMan. We chip away at his health until he goes down, at which point he blows up the path behind him and we have no leads. Lan and Megaman decide to go see their dad to see if he can help figure out what to do next. We're getting pretty close to the endgame here. Lan tells his dad about the WWW pass that we got from BombMan, and we're told to stand by until he finds out more about Dr. Wily's secret base. The next morning, Dr. Wily broadcasts his plans across TVs, which seems pretty dumb to me, but it's also generic supervillain behavior to announce your plans. We find out about a secret metro line connected to our school, and we take it to find Dr. Wily's lair. However, before we get to the final area, I spent some time in the undernet to try and get money. The remaining power-ups are all sold by various shops in the undernet and cost a lot of money, with the last one costing 100,000 zennies. This means a lot of grinding. Each room in the undernet has a different gimmick. In some areas, you can't get hit by an enemy, in others you can't run away from battle, in others you have to get a high battle score. I understand that they needed to add some challenge and variety, so I see where it came from, but these are still more annoyances than real challenges. Once we've gotten some more power-ups, we move to the final area. Wily's tower has a bunch of locked doors, and for each one we have to jack in and destroy the locks. Each area uses stage gimmicks from prior bosses, from the fire extinguishing from FireMan, to the number gates from NumberMan, to the slippery areas from IceMan, to the color switching from ColorMan, and finally the invisible paths from ElecMan. Each of these areas is an easier mini-puzzle rather than the increasingly annoying paths from before. We get to the final lock before Dr. Wily and MagicMan come to stop us. MagicMan's gimmick is that he summons two regular virus enemies, which can actually be quite challenging depending on exactly which enemies they are. He also uses a generic straight fire attack across the middle row, which is tough to avoid when combined with the other viruses, in particular the Cloud virus. However, most of the other viruses are quite easy to manage. We prioritize killing off the Cloud viruses until MagicMan spawns other, less threatening ones. When he uses the Ghost virus, for example, I do my best to avoid hitting them since they just stand there most of the time. They do, however, heal MagicMan every once in a while, but we're doing 80 damage per fully charged shot, and we can dish it out faster than he can heal. After beating MagicMan, Megaman is in a lot of pain due to story reasons, and we discover that he's actually the digital reincarnation of Lan's twin brother, Hub. Chad comes in and gives us a program from our dad to help revive Megaman and make him even more powerful. At this point, we aren't able to save the game anymore, as the MagicMan battle is the first part of the final battle ending. We find Dr. Wily implanting a rocket with the LifeVirus, and decide to jack in and fight the final boss. LifeVirus is actually a pretty cool boss. He can summon up to 3 smaller viruses that do the same tower attacks that ColorMan's guard did, one for each of the elements: fire, water, electric, and grass. The electric one is slightly different, as it's slower moving and can move up and down versus just diagonally, and also leaves a longer sting that prevents you from charging properly. Unlike the other attacks, it can also go over broken panels. The key thing to consider here is that LifeVirus himself has a barrier that can only be broken by attacks that do 100 or more damage, which we literally cannot do as our max buster damage is 80. One of the cool things about the final battle is that the hub program that our dad gave us increases all of our buster stats by 1, meaning that our charge shot now does 96, still just short of being able to break through the LifeVirus barrier. However, he lets up his shield for just a little bit before he uses a special attack, and that's our chance. Our strategy here is to kill the summoned viruses with charge shots as soon as we can, and then charge up until LifeVirus drops his shield. We hit him with a charge shot, avoid his easily telegraphed special attack, and just rapid fire as much as we can. Overall, it's a pretty cool looking but anticlimactic final boss. With that, we've saved the day and beaten Megaman Battle Network Operation Shooting Star with just our Mega Buster. Lan and Megaman are reunited with his friends and family, and everyone lives happily ever after. Until the second game. Now, for those of you who know the series well, you'll know that the challenge doesn't just end here. There's a secret boss in the last stage, Megaman's longtime rival from the classic series, Bass, who has an extremely cool character design in this game. To fight Bass, we'll need to collect every battle chip in the game except the one that he gives out. Now, this takes a lot of time for people using regular battle chips, but it may be almost impossible to do as much damage as necessary with just the Buster. So I'll admit it, I didn't want to spend 40 hours finding out whether or not I could get all the chips, so I used a cheat to get the folder complete and then grinded for money to get the remaining power-ups and HP memories. Most of the major fights we've had thus far have really been wars of attrition. We do as much damage as we can with charge shots or rapid fire, depending on the obstacles unique to each boss, and use recovery chips to stay alive long enough to beat them down. However, that won't work with Bass. Like LifeVirus, he has a 100 damage shield that we will not be able to break through with just our 80 damage buster. His shield does come down as he charges a special attack, and we can do roughly 100 damage to him between our charge shot and a few pellets that sneak through. He has 3 special attacks, all of which hit like a truck. One of them is a pretty easily avoidable electrical charge that snakes through our playable area, but the other 2 are almost unavoidable and can do tons of damage. We beat the main game with about 500 HP, and now we're at the maximum of 1000, but it is still very possible to die to Bass in 1 or 2 special attacks, as each hit does 200-ish damage, and each special attack can comprise of several hits. We've been able to use barriers to great effect throughout the playthrough, but that'll protect us from only one hit at a time. After dying again and again and again, I realized that we need to change up our folder construction. In the later Undernet areas, we find new enemies that provide us some pretty good defensive chips, including Leaf Shield, which is a barrier that heals you upon being hit, but the key to our strategy is going to be two chips, Drop Down and Pop Up, which make you invisible until your next attack. We have to reshuffle our decks quite a bit and stop depending so much on recovery and focus more on these. Any strategy I use can't be dependent on unreal reflexes to avoid base's attacks, and so they have to be based around not getting hit. I avoid his standard attack, hit him with a charge shot, and then use either Leaf Shield, Drop Down, or Pop Up to buy time and wait out his special attacks until he lets his guard down to charge his special attack again. At that point, it becomes rinse and repeat. We can fit 5 of each of those chips in our folder. So between Drop Down and Pop Up, barriers, recovery, and hopefully some good old-fashioned reflexes and luck, we're able to take down base pretty reliably. Are we cheesing? Maybe, but he is a ridiculous secret final boss, and we're using our Mega Buster. With that, we've beaten Megaman Battle Network and the secret boss. These games are known for their gimmicks, but it was really cool to see that the Buster really did work all the way through. The gameplay evolves throughout the series, with new forms and different boss gimmicks. So there's definitely potential for me to play out the whole series depending on the reception to this video. The Battle Network Legacy Collection is coming out in 2023, and I can't wait for more people to discover just how wonderful these games are in high definition. I'd love any thoughts and feedback in the comments below, and hopefully, we'll continue the series and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for tuning in.